What if the ones who saved your life were the same ones who destroyed it? 14-year-old Clara thought she had lost everything the night her parents died in a tragic car accident. But when she rescues two abandoned dogs from the woods, she begins to heal, or so she believes. As the bond between Clara and the dogs deepens, a shocking revelation surfaces: these very animals may be connected to her family's untimely death. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any exciting stories like this one. Here, each video is a journey of overcoming an emotion that you won't want to miss. The soft patter of rain against the windowpane filled the silence of the living room. Clara, a 14-year-old girl with auburn hair and tired eyes, stared into the stormy horizon of the small town she called home. The accident had happened weeks ago, but the pain was still raw. Everyone had the same explanation: it was the storm. Your parents lost control on the wet road, the neighbors said. It's tragic, but it happens. Clara wasn't convinced. Her father had been a careful driver, and her gut told her there was more to the story. Clara called her grandmother, Helena, from the kitchen. Lunch is ready. Helena had always been a strong woman, but since losing her daughter, she seemed smaller, weighed down by grief. Despite her firm tone, there was a warmth in her voice, a sense of care that Clara respected, even if she didn't always understand it. "I'm coming, Grandma," Clara finally replied, though her mind was elsewhere. At the table, the smell of homemade soup filled the air. Helena studied Clara, noting the distant look in her eyes. "You're still thinking about it, aren't you?" Helena asked gently. Clara nodded. "Dad was always so careful. I don't believe the storm was the only reason they crashed." Helena sighed, placing her spoon down with a soft clink. "Sometimes, there's no explanation we can understand. We have to let it go." But Clara couldn't. There were too many questions, too many pieces that didn't fit. After lunch, Clara left the house, wandering aimlessly along a dirt path that bordered the woods. The summer air was thick with humidity, and though the storm had eased, the sky remained heavy with unshed rain. Her mind swirled with memories of the crash, the flashing ambulance lights, the chaos, and the unbearable silence that followed. Her thoughts were so consuming that she nearly missed the faint whimper coming from the bushes. Stopping in her tracks, Clara squinted at the shadows. A pair of eyes glinted back at her. She stepped closer and gasped. A battered dog lay on the ground, its coat matted with dried blood, its breathing shallow. Beside it, a trembling puppy huddled close, its tiny body barely more than skin and bones. "Oh no," Clara whispered, crouching down. "What happened to you?" The older dog, despite its pain, held Clara's gaze with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. "You need help," Clara said softly. "I won't leave you here." With careful movements, she lifted the puppy into her arms and tried to coax the mother dog to stand. It was no easy task. The dog was heavier than she expected, and its injuries made every step agonizing. By the time Clara reached home, her legs ached, and her heart raced with urgency. Helena met her at the door, her expression shifting from concern to shock as she took in the sight. "Clara, what is this?" "They were hurt, Grandma," Clara panted, placing the puppy down gently. "I couldn't leave them there." Helena crossed her arms, her lips pressed into a thin line. "We can't take care of animals, Clara. We have enough on our plate." "Please, Grandma," Clara pleaded, her voice breaking. "They'll die if we don't help them." Helena's eyes softened as she saw the desperation in Clara's face. After a long pause, she sighed. "Fine. But only until the mother heals. And you'll take care of everything. Understood?" "Thank you," Clara said, her relief evident as a small smile broke through her worry. She carried the dogs inside, setting up a makeshift bed in the corner of the living room. As the rain picked up again outside, Clara sat beside them, gently stroking the mother dog's fur. For the first time in weeks, a faint sense of purpose flickered within her. The first rays of dawn filtered through the small window in the living room, casting a soft light on the makeshift bed where the two dogs rested. Clara sat cross-legged nearby, her fingers delicately brushing the mother dog's fur as the puppy nuzzled closer to her. "You're safe now," Clara whispered. The mother dog's eyes, dark and solemn, met hers. It was as if the animal understood her words, and for a fleeting moment, Clara felt a connection that warmed her aching heart. In the days that followed, Clara dedicated herself entirely to caring for the dogs. Early every morning, she cleaned the mother's wounds with water warmed on the stove, while the puppy, who Clara had started calling Buddy, would yip and wag his tiny tail. The mother, whom she named Misty, grew stronger day by day. But even as the dogs began to heal, Clara's thoughts remained tangled with unanswered questions about her parents. One afternoon, while feeding Misty scraps of chicken Helena had reluctantly given her, Clara spoke her thoughts aloud. "Dad wouldn't have lost control just because of the rain," she murmured. "Something else had to have happened." Misty tilted her head, her ears twitching as if listening. Clara leaned back against the sofa and sighed. "Am I just imagining things?" Helena walked into the room, wiping her hands on her apron. She had been keeping a cautious distance from the dogs but couldn't help but notice how much time Clara spent with them. "You're still obsessing over the accident, aren't you?" Helena said, her tone somewhere between concern and frustration. Clara looked up. I can't let it go, Grandma. What if there's something we missed?" Helena frowned, sitting on the armrest of the sofa. "The police investigated everything. They said it was an accident, Clara. Dwelling on it won't bring your parents back." Clara's throat tightened. "But it doesn't feel right. Dad was too careful, especially on that road. I have to know." Helena sighed deeply, glancing at the dogs. Misty's gaze was unwavering, almost as if challenging her. Finally, she nodded. "If it'll give you peace, talk to the police again. But don't get your hopes up, Clara. Sometimes life just doesn't make sense." Clara's chest swelled with a mix of hope and determination. "Thank you, Grandma." As Misty regained her strength, something shifted in the household. Helena, who had initially been resistant to the dogs, began to soften. She still muttered about fur and paw prints, but Clara caught her sneaking pieces of bread to Buddy under the table. One evening, Clara entered the living room to find Helena sitting on the floor with Buddy in her lap. "He's quite the little rascal," Helena admitted with a small smile as Buddy nibbled on her fingers. Clara grinned. "I knew you'd come around." Helena scoffed but didn't push the puppy away. Despite the warmth brought by the dogs, Clara's mind remained clouded. The flashes of ambulance lights, the smell of rain-soaked asphalt, and the echo of hushed voices discussing the crash haunted her at night. One day, as she prepared a bowl of food for Misty, Clara overheard Helena talking to a neighbor in the kitchen. "Clara's been restless," Helena said quietly. "She spends all her time with those dogs, and she won't stop talking about the accident. I just wish she could let it go." The neighbor replied, "Maybe it's her way of coping. Those animals might be exactly what she needs right now." Helena's voice softened. "Maybe you're right." That evening, Clara sat by Misty's side, gently brushing her fur with an old comb. "You've helped me so much already," she said softly. "But there's still so much I don't understand." Misty rested her head on Clara's lap, her body finally relaxed. Buddy, with his boundless energy, bounded into the room and leapt onto Clara's shoulder, making her laugh for the first time in what felt like forever. Even with the mystery weighing on her, Clara felt a flicker of comfort in their presence. For now, it was enough. The small-town police station was a modest building, with faded blue walls and a rickety bench outside where Clara sat, fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. The morning sun was bright, but Clara's mind was shrouded in uncertainty. After much convincing, Helena had called Police Chief Martins to arrange a meeting. Clara was determined to uncover anything that might explain her parents' crash. Clara. The voice of Chief Martins broke her thoughts. The older man was stocky, with a kind but weary face framed by a neatly trimmed mustache. He gestured for her to follow him inside. "You've been through a lot, kid," Martins began, his tone gentle as they settled in his cramped office. "What's on your mind?" Clara took a deep breath. "I can't stop thinking about the accident, Chief. My dad was always careful, especially on that road. I just don't believe the rain was the only reason they lost control." Martins leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. The investigation was thorough. The road was slick, and there was no sign of foul play. But was there anything at all, that seemed unusual? Clara pressed. Martins scratched his chin, considering her question. "The car's camera was damaged in the fire. We couldn't recover much, but we did send the footage to the city lab. They've been working on it. It's a long shot, but if they manage to retrieve anything, we'll let you know." Clara's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Please," she said, her voice firm. "If they find anything, I need to know." Martins nodded. "I'll keep you in the loop." Back home, Clara replayed the conversation in her mind as she fed Misty and Buddy. The possibility of recovered footage gave her a small glimmer of hope, but it also filled her with dread. What if the answers were more painful than the questions? Helena watched her from the doorway, arms crossed. "Did the chief tell you anything useful?" Clara nodded slowly. "They're trying to recover footage from the car. It might show what really happened." Helena's brows furrowed. "Clara, are you sure you want to dig into this? What if it doesn't give you the answers you're looking for?" "I have to know, Grandma," Clara replied, her voice steady. "For them. For me." Helena sighed but didn't argue. She knew better than to try to change Clara's mind when she was this determined. That evening, the weather turned, and a storm rolled in. Clara sat by the window, staring at the rain streaking the glass. Misty and Buddy were curled up beside her, their bodies warm and comforting against her legs. As lightning lit up the sky, Clara's thoughts drifted back to the accident. Her mind filled with images of the sharp curve where her parents' car had gone off the road. She clenched her fists, willing the answers to come to her. Misty stirred, lifting her head to nuzzle Clara's hand. "You don't know anything about what happened, do you?" Clara whispered. The dog's dark eyes locked with hers, and Clara felt an unspoken reassurance, as if Misty was telling her, "You're not alone." The next morning, as the rain cleared, a phone call disrupted the quiet. Helena answered, her voice tense at first but quickly softening. "Yes, she's here. One moment." She handed the receiver to Clara. "It's the chief." Clara's heart raced as she brought the phone to her ear. "Hello? Clara, it's Martins," his voice came through. "The lab managed to recover some footage from your parents' car. It's not much, but it might give us some clarity. Can you come by the station this afternoon?" "I'll be there," Clara said, her voice trembling with anticipation. The police station was eerily quiet when Clara arrived. Martins met her at the front desk and led her to a small room with a screen set up. "We'll watch it together," he said. "But I want to warn you, this might be hard to see." Clara nodded, steeling herself. The video was grainy, damaged by the fire, but it slowly came into focus. Rain hammered against the windshield, and her father's voice was faint but steady, talking to her mother about an upcoming event. Suddenly, the car swerved. A blur of movement appeared on the screen, darting across the wet road. Martins paused the video, pointing to the figures. This is what we managed to recover. It looks like animals were crossing the road. Your father must have swerved to avoid them. Clara's breath hitched as she stared at the screen. The shapes were indistinct, but they were unmistakably dogs. Her knees felt weak as she sank into the chair. Dogs. Martins nodded. It looks like they were strays. It's tragic, Clara, but it explains why he lost control. Clara's mind reeled. Could it be? Were the animals she had saved the same ones that caused the accident? Her stomach churned with a mix of disbelief and guilt. The house felt colder that evening, though the weather outside had calmed. Clara sat at the kitchen table, absently stirring her soup. The footage from earlier in the day replayed in her mind, the blurry shapes darting across the road. Dogs. Her gaze flickered to Misty and Buddy, who lay curled up in the corner of the living room. They had grown more comfortable in the house, Misty's injuries almost fully healed and Buddy's playful antics becoming a regular source of joy. But now, looking at them, Clara felt a pang of confusion and unease. "What's on your mind, Clara?" Helena asked, sitting across from her. Clara hesitated, then finally spoke. What if the dogs I saved caused the accident?" Helena froze, her spoon mid-air. "What are you talking about?" "The footage," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. "The crash happened because Dad swerved to avoid dogs. What if it was them?" Helena set her spoon down with a clink, her face pale. "That's ridiculous. Misty and Buddy were strays, yes, but that doesn't mean they caused the accident." Clara shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "But what if they did, Grandma? How can I live with that?" Helena reached across the table, taking Clara's trembling hands in hers. "Even if it were true, they didn't mean any harm. They're animals, Clara. It wasn't their fault, and it certainly isn't yours." The moment was interrupted by a loud bang outside. Both Clara and Helena froze, their eyes darting toward the back door. "What was that?" Clara whispered, her heart pounding. Helena stood, her face set in a grim expression. "Stay here," she ordered, grabbing the knife she kept on the counter for emergencies. Helena crept toward the back door, her hand gripping the knife tightly. Clara, unable to stay behind, followed a few steps behind her, despite Helena's warning look. Another sound, a scraping noise, came from outside, followed by the distinct sound of wood splintering. "They're trying to force the door," Helena whispered. Before either of them could react, the door burst open, and 3 men barged in, their faces partially obscured by scarves. One was tall and muscular, the clear leader, while the other 2 were wiry and carried crowbars. "Stay back!" Helena shouted, brandishing the knife. The leader sneered, advancing on her. "Put that down, lady. We're just here for whatever's valuable. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Clara's breath caught in her throat as she pressed herself against the wall, paralyzed with fear. The intruders began ransacking the kitchen, pulling open drawers and knocking over chairs. One of them moved toward Helena, reaching for the knife. A low growl echoed through the room. All heads turned toward the living room, where Misty stood, her fur bristling, teeth bared. Buddy was by her side, growling in his high-pitched puppy voice, but just as fierce. "Get that mutt out of here," one of the men barked, swinging his crowbar threateningly. Before he could take another step, Misty lunged. Her jaws clamped onto his arm, and he let out a scream, dropping the crowbar with a loud clang. "Get it off me," he yelled, thrashing wildly. The room erupted into chaos. The leader tried to grab Misty, but Buddy darted forward, nipping at his leg. The man cursed, stumbling back. "Clara, run!" Helena shouted, using the distraction to push Clara toward the hallway. But Clara couldn't move. She watched in stunned awe as Misty fought with a ferocity she had never seen before. The man Misty had bitten managed to shake her off, sending her skidding across the floor. For a moment, Clara's heart stopped, thinking Misty wouldn't get up. But the dog rose again, her eyes blazing with determination. The leader cursed loudly. "We're wasting time. Let's get out of here." The intruders scrambled toward the door, the man Misty had bitten clutching his bleeding arm. They disappeared into the night, their retreating footsteps fading into silence. For a long moment, the house was still except for the sound of heavy breathing, Clara's, Helena's, and Misty's. Helena knelt beside Misty, her hands shaking as she checked the dog for injuries. Misty licked her hand, her tail wagging faintly. "They saved us," Helena murmured, tears streaming down her face. Clara collapsed to the floor, pulling Buddy into her arms as her own tears fell. "I didn't know they could do that," she whispered. Helena looked up at Clara, her face a mixture of wonder and guilt. "I misjudged them," she said softly. "I thought they were just a burden. But they're family, Clara. They've proven that tonight." Clara nodded, stroking Buddy's soft fur. "They are family." Despite the night's terror, something shifted between them all. Misty and Buddy had fought for them, risked their lives for them. And in that moment, the doubts Clara had felt about their presence in her life began to dissolve. The following day, Clara sat on the living room floor with Misty and Buddy resting beside her. Their bravery the previous night had solidified their place in her heart, but the video footage still lingered in her mind. Helena entered the room with a mug of tea and sat on the worn armchair. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently. Clara shrugged. "I don't know. Grateful for them. Confused about everything else." The conversation was interrupted by the sharp ring of the telephone. Helena picked it up, her expression growing tense as she listened. After a moment, she nodded and turned to Clara. "It's Chief Martins," Helena said. "He wants us to come to the station. They've recovered more footage." Clara's stomach tightened. She hadn't expected this so soon. The police station felt colder than usual. Chief Martins ushered them into his office, where a laptop was set up on the desk. His face was grave. "Clara, I need you to understand that what you're about to see might be difficult," he said. Clara nodded, gripping the edges of her chair. Helena reached over, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Martins pressed play. The footage began the same way as before, rain hammering against the windshield, her father's calm voice. But this time, the video continued past the blur of movement on the road. Clara leaned forward as the shapes came into focus. Two dogs dashed across the road, one smaller than the other, their figures illuminated briefly by the car's headlights. Her father's voice rose, alarmed. "Watch out!" The car swerved violently, and the screen filled with chaotic motion before cutting to black. Martins paused the video. "That's all we could recover," he said quietly. Clara's hands trembled as she stared at the frozen screen. The dogs were unmistakable. "It's them," she whispered, her voice breaking. Helena's eyes widened in shock. "Clara, you don't know that for sure." Clara turned to her grandmother, her face pale. "It's them, Grandma. Misty and Buddy. They're the ones who caused the accident." The drive home was silent. Clara stared out the window, her thoughts racing. Every moment she had spent with the dogs, feeding them, caring for them, laughing at Buddy's antics, was now clouded by the knowledge of what had happened. Once home, Clara stood in the doorway, watching Misty and Buddy wag their tails in greeting. Her chest tightened. "I need to be alone," she muttered, brushing past them. She locked herself in her room, collapsing onto her bed as tears streamed down her face. How could she reconcile her love for them with the fact that they had unknowingly taken her parents from her? Over the next few days, Clara avoided Misty and Buddy. She no longer sat with them in the living room or played with Buddy in the yard. The dogs noticed the change. Buddy whined and pawed at Clara's door, but she couldn't bring herself to open it. Misty, sensing the tension, kept her distance, her once bright eyes filled with sadness. Helena watched the rift with concern. One evening, she approached Clara, who was sitting silently at the dinner table. "You're punishing them for something they didn't do on purpose," Helena said. Clara shook her head, her voice tight. "I can't look at them without thinking about what happened." Helena sighed. "Clara, they didn't mean to hurt anyone. They're animals, they couldn't have known the consequences of their actions." "I know that," Clara said, her voice cracking. "But it still hurts." One cold, snowy night, Clara woke to an eerie silence. Something felt off. She threw on a sweater and went downstairs, finding the corner where Misty and Buddy usually slept empty. Panic surged through her. "Grandma," she called, waking Helena. "What is it?" Helena asked groggily. "The dogs, they're gone," Clara said, her voice trembling. Helena's eyes widened. "Maybe they're just outside. Let's look." Clara grabbed a flashlight and rushed into the snowstorm. The cold wind bit at her skin as she called out their names. "Misty! Buddy!" The only response was the howl of the wind. After what felt like hours of searching, Clara spotted a small, dark shape under an old billboard. Her heart leapt as she ran closer. There they were, huddled together for warmth, snow covering their shivering bodies. Misty lifted her head weakly as Clara approached, her eyes filled with sorrow. Clara dropped to her knees, tears freezing on her cheeks. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, wrapping her arms around them. "I was so angry, but I never stopped loving you. Please come back home." Misty licked Clara's hand, and Buddy wagged his tail weakly. The bond between them, though strained, had never truly broken. Clara and Helena brought the dogs inside, wrapping them in blankets and feeding them warm broth. That night, as the storm raged outside, Clara sat beside Misty and Buddy, stroking their fur. She whispered, "We've all been through so much. But you're my family now, and I won't lose you again." The weight of her guilt began to lift, replaced by a quiet understanding. The dogs had been victims of circumstance, just as she and her parents had been. The days following the storm were bittersweet. Clara had brought Misty and Buddy back into her heart, but the revelation about their connection to her parents' accident still lingered like a shadow. At first, she tried to rebuild the bond, spending time with them as she had before. She played fetch with Buddy in the yard and sat with Misty in the evenings. But her laughter felt hollow, her affection weighed down by unspoken guilt. Helena noticed the strain. One morning, as she poured tea for Clara, she spoke softly, "You can't move forward if you keep holding on to this, Clara." Clara stared into her cup. "It's not that simple, Grandma. Every time I look at them, I see that night. The accident." Helena sighed, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Then maybe you need to let them go." Clara's eyes snapped to her grandmother's. "What do you mean?" "They deserve a home where they'll be loved without hesitation," Helena said. "And maybe you need space to heal without the constant reminder." The idea haunted Clara all day. Could she truly let them go? Buddy's wagging tail and Misty's steady gaze filled her mind. But so did the rain-slicked road, the ambulance lights, and her father's panicked voice. That evening, Clara sat by Misty and Buddy, running her hands through their fur. Misty leaned into her touch, while Buddy rested his head on her lap. "You deserve better," Clara whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know if I can give you that anymore." The next day, Clara called the town's small animal rescue. She explained that she couldn't keep the dogs but wanted to make sure they found a good home. "We'll take care of them," the woman on the other end assured her. "We'll make sure they're safe." Clara hung up, her chest tight. It felt like losing her parents all over again. The rescue volunteers arrived a few days later. Helena helped Clara prepare, though neither of them spoke much. When the van pulled into the driveway, Clara knelt by Misty and Buddy, tears streaming down her face. "I love you both so much," she said, her voice trembling. "Please don't think I'm giving up on you." Buddy licked her cheek, while Misty nuzzled her hand. The volunteers gently led the dogs to the van. Clara watched as they climbed in, their eyes filled with confusion. When the van disappeared down the road, she fell to her knees, sobbing. Helena wrapped her arms around her. "You did what you thought was best," she said. "That's all anyone can ask." The house felt unbearably quiet without Misty and Buddy. Clara wandered from room to room, her footsteps echoing. Their absence left a void that nothing seemed to fill. At night, Clara lay awake, replaying memories of her time with the dogs, the way Buddy's playful antics made her laugh, the way Misty's quiet strength comforted her during her darkest days. One morning, Helena found Clara sitting on the porch steps, staring at the horizon. "Do you regret it?" Helena asked. Clara nodded slowly. "I thought it would make things easier. But it doesn't. It just feels wrong." A week later, Clara received a call from the animal rescue. "Hi, Clara," the woman said. "I just wanted to let you know that Misty and Buddy are doing well. They've been placed in a foster home together, and the family is considering adopting them permanently." Clara felt a pang of relief mixed with sadness. "That's good," she said quietly. "They seem happy," the woman added. "But Misty, she seems to be waiting for something. Or someone." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She thanked the woman and hung up, her heart pounding. The next day, Clara paced the living room, her thoughts racing. She couldn't ignore what the woman had said about Misty. The idea of them moving on without her filled her with dread. Helena entered the room, watching her granddaughter with a knowing look. "You miss them," she said. Clara nodded. "I made a mistake, Grandma. They were my family, and I gave them up because I was scared. I need to make it right." Helena smiled gently. "Then go get them." As Clara drove to the foster home, rain began to fall. By the time she arrived, it had turned into a downpour, the road slick with water. She parked in the driveway and hurried to the door, her heart pounding with anticipation. When the door opened, Misty and Buddy were there, their tails wagging furiously. Misty let out a low, happy bark, and Buddy leapt into Clara's arms. "I'm so sorry," Clara sobbed, holding them both tightly. "I never should have let you go." The foster family smiled, understanding the bond between Clara and the dogs. "It's clear they belong with you," the father said. Clara returned to the small house with Misty and Buddy that night. Helena greeted them at the door, her face lighting up at the sight of the dogs. "They're back where they belong," she said. Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in weeks, the house felt warm again. The morning light streamed through the windows, casting a soft glow on the small living room where Misty and Buddy lay curled up together. Clara sat beside them, running her fingers gently through their fur. For the first time in weeks, her heart felt lighter, the ache of loss replaced by a quiet sense of peace. Helena appeared in the doorway, holding a steaming mug of tea. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Clara looked up at her grandmother, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Better. It feels right, having them here." Helena sat down beside her, placing the mug on the table. "They're part of this family now. Just like you and me." The days that followed were filled with a sense of renewal. Clara began to see the accident not as something to carry blame for, but as a tragedy that no one, not her, not Misty, not Buddy, could have prevented. One evening, she sat outside with the dogs, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "You didn't mean to cause what happened," she whispered, her voice steady. "And neither did I. We were all just trying to survive." Misty nudged Clara's hand, and Buddy let out a happy bark, as if agreeing with her. Helena, who had once been wary of the dogs, had grown to love them as much as Clara did. She found herself sneaking treats to Buddy during meals and brushing Misty's fur in the afternoons. One afternoon, Clara caught Helena talking softly to Misty. "You're a brave one, aren't you?" Helena murmured. "You saved us that night." "Maybe I needed you as much as Clara did." Clara smiled from the doorway, her heart swelling with gratitude. Weeks turned into months, and life in the small house began to feel normal again. The weight of grief still lingered, but it was no longer unbearable. Instead, it became a part of their story, a thread woven into the fabric of their lives. Clara returned to school, her confidence slowly rebuilding. She found herself smiling more, laughing with friends, and even sharing stories about Misty and Buddy. At home, the dogs continued to bring joy and comfort. Buddy's antics never failed to make them laugh, and Misty's quiet strength was a source of calm for them both. One crisp spring morning, a car pulled into the driveway. Clara and Helena exchanged curious glances as a man in uniform stepped out. It was Chief Martins. He greeted them warmly, tipping his hat. "I just wanted to check in," he said. "How are you holding up, Clara?" Clara smiled. "Better. Thank you for everything." Martins nodded, his gaze drifting to Misty and Buddy, who were sitting obediently by Clara's side. "I heard they came back home." "They're good dogs." "The best," Clara replied, ruffling Buddy's ears. Martins smiled. "Your parents would be proud of you, Clara. They'd want you to be happy." Clara's throat tightened, but she nodded. "Thank you. That means a lot." That evening, Helena prepared Clara's favorite meal, and they ate together in the warm glow of the kitchen. Misty lay at Clara's feet, while Buddy gnawed on a toy nearby. As they finished dinner, Helena raised her glass of iced tea. "To family," she said, her voice steady and full of love. Clara raised her glass as well, her heart full. "To family." The clink of their glasses echoed softly through the room, a sound that carried hope and healing. As summer arrived, the small house was filled with light and laughter. Clara often took Misty and Buddy for long walks, exploring trails her parents had loved. Each step forward felt like a tribute to their memory, a way to honor their lives by embracing her own. Sitting on the porch one evening, Helena turned to Clara. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" Clara shook her head, curious. "I see strength," Helena said. "The kind that turns pain into something beautiful. And I see someone who knows how to love, even when it's hard." Clara leaned her head against her grandmother's shoulder, her eyes on the sunset. "I had good teachers," she said softly, glancing at Misty and Buddy. Misty and Buddy had taught Clara and Helena something they hadn't known they needed, that love could endure, even in the face of tragedy. It could heal wounds, bridge gaps, and build families where none had existed before. Their journey had been painful, but it had brought them closer than ever. Together, they faced the future with hope, knowing that no matter what storms came, they would weather them as a family. If you liked this story and want more content like this, leave a like, share it with someone you know will be moved by it, and of course, subscribe to the channel. Together, we will explore inspiring stories and moments that touch the heart. Until the next video.